Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz. I'm the rabbi of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia, speaking to you from the pulpit of our synagogue. This is the third of a three-part message related to the Jewish 7 weeks of consolation, and it's entitled, Keeping Hope Alive. While not all languages proceed in this way, the ones most familiar to us handle time by using the concepts past, present, and future. Over the past few weeks, since the 9th day of Av, Tisha B'Av, the sad anniversary of the destruction of the two Jerusalem temples, first by the Babylonians, then by the Romans, we have been exploring the theme of consolation that is the focus of this portion of the annual Jewish calendar. The previous two messages in this series treated the domains of past and present. When our rabbis taught that even with the destruction of the temple, the path to maintaining a relationship with God was still open. They were saying that the God of our ancestors, the God we knew in our national past, was still in relationship with us, despite the ruin of the institutional center of Judaism since biblical times. Moreover, when the rabbis ended the pernicious subdivision of Judaism into competing sects, and created a structure in which people could disagree and still be counted as part of the same community, they showed how to maintain the blessings of a Jewish community in the present era. But what of the future? That is the third dimension of the rabbinic teaching of consolation, and thus the final installment of this series of messages. There had been a militant impulse within late ancient Jewish society. The Maccabees had conducted the first successful revolt for religious freedom in human history. However, to save lives, the rabbis broke with that tendency. In the wake of the Roman destruction of the temple, followed by the Emperor Trajan's brutal suppression of the revolt of Jews in the years 115 through 117, and even more damaging, the devastation of the Jewish community of Israel by the armies of the Emperor Hadrian during the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 of the Common Era. In the wake of those calamities, the rabbis taught the Jewish community to hold on, to endure, to outlast their Roman tormentors, to pray for a radically better future, and to make that future possible by keeping hope alive. We are the heirs of their efforts and the beneficiaries of their successes. Our liturgy is filled with hope for, quote, God's merciful return to Zion. That hope helped to sustain us through all the turns of what the poet Yehuda Amichai has called the, quote, awful Chad Gadya machine, the succession of violent conquerors destroying each other and persecuting our people. Jihadists and crusaders, mobs and monarchs all took their toll on the suffering body of the people Israel. But our spirit remained unvanquished, a testimonial to the strength of hope. In the past century and a quarter, changing historical circumstances allowed us to actualize that hope. The path to an independent state of Israel was twisted with factors as diverse as the deviousness of British imperialism, the reluctance on the part of the victors of World War II to absorb more than a fraction of post-Holocaust Jewish refugees, and the amoral game of nations embroiled in the Cold War, each playing a role. But whether coincidence or karma, Herzl's journal entry in his journal written in the aftermath of the First Zionist Congress proved prophetic. He wrote these words in 1897, 50 years before the UN vote to partition the territory known as Palestine and authorize the creation of a Jewish state. Herzl wrote, "At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I said this out loud today, I would be greeted by universal laughter. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it." Today, over a century and a quarter since the rise of modern Zionism, we can say that in one way Herzl was wrong, and in one way he was right. He was wrong in his optimistic prediction that with the return of the Jewish people to the status of independence, anti-Semitism would abate. On the contrary, the State of Israel is the magnet for anti-Semites from extremists left and right. One of the greatest worries of the past 2 years is that anti-Semitism is no longer just the province of extremists. It has somehow normalized, and it is now embraced by a larger part of the political spectrum than at any time since the Second World War. Herzl was right, however, by saying that the Jewish people need an independent state to safeguard our own physical welfare. I would ask all those who disagree with the way that the Israeli government has proceeded after the Hamas attack of October 7th, 2023, to ponder if they hate Israel's current policies more than they love having an independent Jewish state. I, for one, do not intend to go back to the era of depending on the fragile and ephemeral goodwill of other countries for the actual survival of my people. And what of the rabbinic notion of consolation as being focused on a radically better future? That is still true. The day when it will not be fashionable to hate Jews is still a future aspiration. The day when, quote, "nation will not lift up sword against nation," the words of Isaiah, "Lo yisa goy el goy cherev." That too is a future hope. I believe that these two aspirations are actually two sides of the same coin, the coin of the deferred but much yearned for maturation of our human species. May God help us to bring that day. As the Kaddish prayer says, "V'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv." May God's sovereignty come in our day, speedily and soon, to which we are bidden to respond, Amen. And indeed, Amen.